new on the Quisha King Show. Imagine your parents dropping you off in a quote-unquote breadbasket as a newborn baby, never to be seen again. The thought of this is almost too horrific to even imagine. But this is exactly how the life of Jon Heymann, my guest today, this is how his life began. Jon was left in a box to be sold and forced into child slavery in Athens, Greece. He was left there to be sold into human trafficking. Imagine growing up not even knowing what day you were born. Today we're going to sit down and talk with Jon Heymann, who in Greece was dropped off in a breadbasket, is what they called it. And he was trafficked, human trafficked as a child in Greece and then brought to America. He writes his book, Agonizing Peace, to help all of us get through the trauma that we have to deal with in life. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mr. Jon Heymann.
Thank you, Quisha. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for joining me. Yeah, so why don't we just start at the beginning? Tell us what happened when you were a child in Greece.
Okay, now obviously I'm telling you stories that I've heard or have seen printed articles like you had mentioned, the bread box, things like that. But I was dropped off at a bread box at an asylum. It was called the Athens Municipal Infant Asylum. Mm-hmm. How would you like to live in an asylum, right? Anyhow, this is where they drop children off post-World War II for the next few decades, because about 100,000 people were killed in Greece during World War II, and the poverty was amazing, because Greece was not one of the highlighted countries during World War II, as you might recall from your study of history. Mussolini tried to defeat Greece. He didn't, but weakened it tremendously. Hitler did defeat Greece. So the poverty was amazing. So people could not afford to feed their families. So they would go to government entities, to mission groups, to Christian mission groups, secular ones. And I was dumped off in what's now an art museum, but in those days it was called the Athens Municipal Infant Asylum. The building is still there. Wow. Still looks the same too. If you want me to tell you more details, I can, because it was pretty horrendous. But that's where I was dumped off.
What is your first memory of the asylum?
Well, the asylum, I don't have clear memories, because I think I was taken out of there. Mm-hmm. Although when my wife and I visited, I felt eerie feelings walking into that building again. Mm-hmm. This is what happened. About 7-8 years ago, we were over in Greece for a vacation, quite frankly. I was not looking for my real parents. I don't know who they are. Somebody dumped me off, abandoned me, didn't want me, couldn't afford to raise me. Whatever the reason, I don't know. But I did not go over for a soul-searching search for my parents. But the very last day we were in Greece, we knew the address of the asylum, so we went to it. And it's now an art museum. And when we went up to the big, big door, I could feel it already. I just felt, so I don't have any vivid memories. I just felt like, wow, this was not a good place in my life. There are pictures. I'm not sure if you have the pictures with you today, but there are pictures of the fence that was around the building. It's still there. It has sharp points to it, obviously to keep the children in. So I'm imagining that children older than infants were in that building as well. You will see steel bars on the ground floor windows. Mm-hmm. For what? So children wouldn't escape an asylum? Yeah. I mean, this was not a pleasant place. But when we went up just 7 or 8 years ago, we knocked on the door. As an art museum, you know, they would have sculptures in there or paintings or displays of some kind. And a young lady came around to open the door and came around and said, well, we don't have any display going on. You'll have to come back when we have one. And my wife said something to the order of, he was born here, which technically I wasn't born there, but right. An older lady came whipping around the door, pulled us into the building and shut the door on the people standing behind us. So she said to us, you can walk around. Now, honestly, Quisha, think about this. There was no sculptures, no paintings in that building. I could have not timed it better. That was like it was a God thing that I was supposed to see that building again, just like it looked when I was a little child. I mean, the first thing I saw was the huge wide staircase with the original wood that was still there, that was worn from decades of people walking on it, and nothing on the walls, no sculptures to detract my vision. And my wife was taking pictures. I finally told her, please stop taking pictures, because I was getting pretty emotional. But we have enough.
Why were you getting emotional?
I don't know. It was not a good emotion. It was a fearful kind of an emotion, even as an adult, a fearful. I teach psychology at the college level. We talk about memories, and memories do not decay if they are traumatic. If they are just normal memories like vacations you went on, eventually as you get older, those memories decay. And you sometimes lose the memories unless people talk about it again, then you have recall again. But with me, I didn't have people to tell me stories.
Right.
So I only had the feelings, or what I call child knee-high memories, because you're a small child, knee-high memories. That's all I have, and a few pictures, not very many. And I think when I walked in that building, walked up the steps, looked down the hallway, the long hallway with these big doors where children used to be just packed in there. That's what I was told. But it looks just like what I was told.
Wow.
And now I got to see it firsthand, which was amazing. When I stood at the top of the stairways, there is a picture of me standing there, I finally said to Cheryl, I said, please stop taking pictures, because I just couldn't hold the emotion in. But it was not a good one. It was a fearful one of bad memories. The memories I do have are very vivid, but they were not of the asylum.
So you recount in the book that you called the experience, it was a slave mill.
Yeah.
And in my mind, what I hear when I read that is that you guys were working, you were milling, that you were being forced to work, and you were 5 years old,
kid,
a little child, 4 or 5 years old.
5, yeah.
Do you remember any of that?
Yes, that part I do remember. Yeah.
So help us understand share with us, what did you experience, and what memory do you have?
If anybody listening, watching this, remembers the movie Slumdog Millionaire, those are the kind of memories I have of being up on the very famous hill called the Acropolis. And there's a very famous building up there, the Parthenon. Now, Hitler did not destroy the Parthenon. He had done that in other countries, but he did not destroy it. He did raise the Nazi flag, but he did not destroy the building. So the rubble that you see around it happened centuries before. He kept it intact as much as it was. And for those who've been over in Greece, everybody knows what the Parthenon is. It is like, the star jewel of at least the city of Athens and the country of Greece. Anyhow, my memories are of being up there and attempting and trying to steal from tourists.
Really?
As groups of children,
So
not just by myself.
Up on the Parthenon.
Yeah.
And you remember trying to get money
trying
from
to pick
tourists.
rubble. Even back then, you were not allowed to do it. You certainly are not allowed to do it now because it's worth money.
Right.
If you can say you have a piece of the Parthenon in your hand, you can sell it. You can sell it to tourists, stand on the corners. But we had a system of stealing from tourists. First of all, you would talk to the tourists. If they didn't speak your language, you knew that they were not from there.
Right.
And hence, even as a little child, you knew, okay, they're not from here. So as soon as I can get anything from them, I'm running because they won't know where I'm going because there's a lot of streets in Athens, being a major city.
Do you remember if you had any inclination to get away from, when you were out there, I guess we would call it hustling, like trying to hustle some money up, for your kidnappers. Yeah. Do you remember trying to get away from them?
I'll tell you, my whole career has been built in working with disenfranchised children here in the United States. And one of the things I learned from them that I clearly remember is that when you live in poverty, you don't know you're living in poverty.
Sure.
You don't know it because you're a kid.
Right.
You're starting to think, oh my gosh, I guess every child lives this way. Every child survives this way. And if you don't bring enough money back to this tiny little house, there's a little picture back here of the house that I recall being in, you got beat up because you didn't bring back enough.
So you remember them beating you?
Yeah, I remember being thrown out of a window. Yeah. Yeah, I remember getting beat up by a faceless man. Why my memories do not remember a very short woman in the kitchen, a crib in the kitchen that I slept in, because I was short back then. I'm still short. But I was 4 years old. I shouldn't be in a crib.
Yeah.
In the kitchen, and in the second room where this faceless man was. She was faceless too, but I remember her in a kitchen. Those are the two people I remember in Greece, and he abused me. He abused me. Another reporter once asked me, was there sexual abuse? And again, as a
I was getting to that.
psychologist, I do illustrate in the book, Agonizing Peace, how a young lady does not remember a horrendous accident on a Sea-Doo that would have otherwise killed her. She doesn't remember the accident at all. And there are times in our brain that we don't remember. We remember the horrific things that have happened to us, but sometimes our mind blocks the most horrific things.
It's like a coping mechanism.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Coping that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Now, I have enough memories that even after I was adopted, I had nightmares till about 10 years old, really bad ones, about constantly being beat up, taken out of the bathroom. If I was going to the bathroom and a monster would come in and take me and walk me right past my family into some dirt mounds that were next to our house in New Jersey. And
Is that
getting beat up.
how you recall him, as a monster?
Yeah. Actually, a water monster that would come out of the tub.
Do you remember?
Thanks for opening that scar. I'm just kidding. I don't mind talking about this.
It helps a lot of people, though.
I know.
It really does. So thank you for going there with me.
And I might be smiling, but I'm telling you, I'm getting chills just telling the stories again. But go ahead. I don't mind.
Why do you think that there's a reference of water? Is it because you were beaten in the tub or something, or is that?
I have never been able to figure that connection.
Okay.
That's Sigmund Freud would have a heyday with my dreams, with my nightmares, because he loved to study dreams as a famous psychologist, and others have done the same. I don't know the connection. I don't.
Yeah.
But that was a recurring dream. And anybody who has a recurring dream, probably 50 to 60, 70% of it is true. Obviously, it was not a water monster that ever beat me up.
Right.
But taking me to a dirt mound and beating me up was probably true in Greece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you would say that most of the work that that the children were sent out to do was to get money from the tourists. Was there any other type of labor that you guys had to endure?
No, we were not picking vegetables in fields or anything like that, that I recall.
Would there be like an adult there to supervise?
I don't remember. Sure? That's a good question. I don't remember any adults around us when we were either trying to pickpocket the tourists or kicking them in the ankle. And then when they would bend over, we would try to get things out of their pockets and then run.
Did they, before we move on, did they instruct you all how to do this?
Somebody did. I remember kids that were bigger than me, though. So they might have been trained, and then they trained me. Okay. I might have been a thief in training, because I don't remember any of the verbal. Yeah. Even though I lived clearly long enough to speak the Greek language, I don't speak it today. You can lose the language very fast. And I wish my parents had kept me. One thing I want to make clear too to the audience is I'm not angry at Greece. I'm not angry at Greeks. I'm only angry at the people that did this to me, because they were monsters. Yeah. And somebody that actually creates a business plan, they may not write it down and bring it to a bank for a loan, but they created a business plan to make money off us children. Right. I think the Bible says that there's a special place in hell for people that do that to children. Yeah, absolutely. Anyhow, I shouldn't have gone down that rabbit hole, but one of the things that I was blessed with apparently was nobody busted my fingers, which from that movie that I referred to, Slumdog Millionaire, you will see that they did that. They sometimes would even cut a finger off, or they would bust a kneecap so that the children hobbled. But we ran, so don't make me hobble, because I need to run once I steal whatever I steal. Wow. So in some funny, weird way, I was good at raising money back then, even as a child. But
take us to when you were adopted. So you were later adopted by an American family. Yeah. Take us through how that process happened.
Yeah. Well, going back to the feeding, that bread box was like a large mail slot that a lot of people have in their front door. The mailman drops the mail through that, falls on the floor or into a bucket. Anyhow, this was bigger because they could fit gallons of milk in it and bread and babies. So that's how the relief organizations would also deliver food to the asylums. And there was one from Teaneck, New Jersey called AMG International, American Mission to the Greeks. It was started by a man named Spiros Odiates, who was a Bible scholar, a very good one. He actually wrote his own version. I mean, he didn't write the Bible, but he wrote concordance, concordance, all the notes that you have in many Bibles. He did his own because he was such a Greek scholar. But he also ran the mission, and it was a relief mission for food. My mom, Lois Heymann, was a volunteer for him, and she would say to him, you know, we're just perpetuating the inevitable. These children are still starving. And he said, what do you propose? And she says, why don't we bring some of them over here to the United States and we can feed them right here? And he said, you mean adopt? And she said, yes. And she already had one son. So she adopted the first two of many kids that were adopted. There's one picture behind me here that you see me with Spiros Odiates, and you see the two other children that were adopted to a family that went to Pennsylvania. We lived in New Jersey. So my sister, who became my sister, she's not my blood sister, but she was in a basket on the airplane next to me. And the adoption papers show that my parents actually paid an additional $1,000. And remember, back in the mid-1950s, that was a lot of money, $1,000. I don't know what it equates to today, but it's not 1,000. It's probably 15, 20,000, just to have somebody accompany us over here. But there was nobody on the plane. It was just part of the money-making scheme over there, not part of the AMG. AMG was a legitimate organization.
Do you remember leaving was there any preparation? Like, did they tell you, okay, you're leaving, you're never coming back?
I have no memory of the plane flight until we landed. I do remember going down steps onto a tarmac, and I remember people trying to come up and hug me, and I didn't want to be hugged.
What was that like?
Well, I got real stiff, as I recall, and also they had gifts with them. I didn't want any gifts. Remember, every time an adult touched me, they hurt me over in Greece. So quite frankly, Quisha, it took at least 2 years back in my family, Heymann's. My family are very huggy, but they couldn't hug me for 2 years. And I remember the first time I stood stiff as a board with both my arms at my side, and my mom in the kitchen of that house in Teaneck, New Jersey, finally kneeling down. She never tried to lord herself over me. Kneeled down and gave me a hug. She tried many times. I wouldn't let her. I remember throwing a metal truck. You remember toys back then were all made out of steel. I remember throwing a metal truck at my aunt who tried to give me a gift. I didn't want any gifts from anybody.
So you didn't want to be touched, you didn't want to be held, you just wanted
This was radically different. You talk about muscle memory. My muscle memory was anytime an adult approached me, I was going to get hurt. So all of a sudden, all these new adults are trying to approach me and show me love. I didn't know what love was. I had no idea what love was.
So you must have been completely terrified at the same time, being having left the asylum with all that trauma, and then now you're being put into this new home with
who didn't speak my language.
Who did not speak your language. It's a whole nother aspect. And you're in a foreign country. Had you ever even heard of America? Was that a concept?
No, this was all preschool. I didn't start school till I was in America. Couldn't read till I was in 3rd grade. I remember my 3rd grade teacher here in the States. She was one of the most gentle people in the world. My 2nd grade teacher was awful.
What was it like going to school?
I don't remember kindergarten. For some reason, I only remember 2nd grade. I don't remember kindergarten and 1st grade. They sent me, they told me, you know, it's weird what your mind does. You remember the horrendous activity before you come to the States. You don't, or I'm talking about myself, you don't recall the plane ride, because I don't. I remember being on the ground in the airplane. It was a big plane. I do remember the basket next to me in the plane. no one else, but I don't remember anybody seating us or instructing us.
And you don't
at all.
remember like your first day of school or
No, I don't.
just what memories do you
pictures.
have of when you were first in this new family?
Good question. And some of these might be from pictures. I don't have any of these pictures with me, but I do have them back at the house. They bought me because I was so weak, being malnutritioned. I was incredibly weak. So they had to strengthen my muscles. So in the old days, there used to be this thing that your feet would push out, your arms would go back like this, and it would make the wheels go. It had 4 wheels, all steel. Everything was steel back then, not plastic like our toys are today. And that was to help strengthen my arms and my legs. I remember going up and down our driveway. I remember my brother, he's 2 years older than me, pushing me up the hill and then me going back down. That I remember. So I do remember having good times, learning to trust people. But it took a long time to trust,
I'm sure.
I didn't care too much about the kids because kids over there, that's who you palled out with. That's who you hung out with,
Yeah. So what would you say was your first fond memory of America, being in this new family? What do you remember? Anything that made you laugh really hard, or just like a good memory
That's a great question. Sitting around the dining room table, because we always had dinner. This is after I was adopted. Always had dinner around the dining room table. And my father was a jokester, so he'd always joke. Once I started to learn more and more of the language, which took a while, then I could understand and obviously speak it. And I lost the Greek language, which I really do regret, and picked up the new language. And obviously I couldn't read, but I could speak before 3rd grade. So my fondest first, you had asked me about a memory. Sitting around that dining room table, and oddly enough, not sure why, but I have that clock today. There was a clock, it was a large house, like at least 3 full floors. I would walk up, and on a landing there was an old clock there. And for some reason I always remember that. My grandmother would always have me wind it, and I still have that clock. That I remember. And as a really little kid, I have a lot of fond memories growing up with the Heymans. But as my first, probably sitting around the dining room table and learning to laugh.
That's incredible. So when your family consisted of your grandparents were in the home too, so it was
my grandmother,
your grandmother, your mother and father, and then your siblings.
I didn't know her husband. He had passed away before I came to America.
Wow, that's incredible. So in your book, you talk a lot about your relationship with God, and this is really truly the crux of the book. Can you share with us what started even the spark of wanting to have a relationship with God? Because I would think that, going through something traumatic like that, your instinct might be to reject anything like a God, because you went through something so traumatic as a child. How could a loving God put a child through such a horrible situation?
Quisha, that is the question that made me write the book. Why would God allow a kid to go through that? Now remember, I'm just one of millions of kids. Trafficking still goes on. And it goes on for all kinds of ages. I mean, people traffic in children, they traffic in girls, they traffic in sex, and here's the key, they traffic in fear. If they can get you scared, you will do anything for the people that are trafficking you. If they, like in my case, but for any of those other things I just mentioned, that's what traffickers do. These people create a business plan to create fear in people so that you will not leave their enclave, their organization or their group. So I apologize. Please ask the question again.
How did you develop a relationship with God? What was the thing that even sparked wanting to have a relationship?
I'm guessing Mahatma Gandhi once said, I like your Christ, but I don't like your Christians. People are an example of God. We are the feet and the hands of Jesus. We are. But when I was a little kid, it was the Heymans. So had I stayed in Greece, which is another deep question I talk about in the book Agonizing Peace, lingering doubts. Had I stayed there, I'm not so sure I would have ever been drawn to God. But because I was loved somewhere in the Bible, I think it's 1 Peter, says, love covers a multitude of sins.
That's right.
And they were persistent in loving me, persistent in loving me. And I wasn't a perfect kid. I mean, they had to be persistent disciplining me too, but not beating me up.
Right.
In loving me, I had an example of a heavenly Father, because before that, I didn't have a father that cared about me. And whoever that man was in that house was not my father.
Right.
So I had no example of adults that loved me. So obviously I don't think I would have ever been drawn to have a relationship with God or peace with God, which is what I talk about in the book. And I wrote it because I believe a lot of people have gone, not necessarily exactly through what I went through. Some have gone through much worse than I have gone through. A traumatic experience, losing a child, I talk about that. Somebody not coming home from war, losing a marriage because of infidelity or because of something else, losing a job and radically, going into poverty from, not being able to. When you go through a traumatic experience, whatever that might be, and traumatic experiences are more than just, oh my gosh, things didn't go well at work today.
Right.
Or I had a fight with my wife yesterday. No, this is worse than that, much worse than that. When that happens, who can we count on? When we can't count on those that represent God, when we can't count on people that say they believe in Jesus as Savior, but they're not there for us, we're apt to be drawn away from God, not closer to Him.
So
what drew
that for
me
you? Yeah.
was my family. That's what drew me close to God. So there came a time at 9 years old in my church up in New Jersey that I wanted to accept God's Son as my Savior.
Wow.
And it took, from 5 to 9 years old, and I'd like to say I lived for Him perfectly after that. I didn't, but I knew I was saved. That's the term that's used in the Bible, and that's a term that I go by now.
So from 5 to 9, what transpired? Where's your family? Were they church-going folks? Were they,
We used to sing around the table, Quisha. We used to sing
around the table.
Oh my gosh, that's where I learned some of the gospel songs.
You used to go to, so you were going to church every Sunday.
Yeah.
Usually most kids around 9 years old, some of them were thinking about giving their life over to Christ. Right. Most probably don't.
Right.
They're thinking about playing and kicking balls and doing all the things kids do.
I did that as well, yeah.
So what was it for you? Especially, coming from this traumatic experience, then coming to America and being in this incredible loving family. Was there a moment? Was there, anything that you remember that just sparked your want to get to know Jesus?
I think, Quisha, it was simply this. I came to realize that awful things had happened to me. I wasn't responsible for that. But I wasn't perfect. And I was responsible for the wrong things I did, even as a kid. And you start to come to grips with the fact that, wow, sin affected a lot of people that treated me the way they did, but it also affected me too. And I'm not responsible for them. Yeah. I'm only responsible for me. Yeah. And clearly, I was a sinner. I'm still a sinner. I'm not perfect. And I needed to be saved. It's a real simple message. I don't know why people complicate it today. I really don't. It's a gift. That's what the Bible says. It's a gift of God, lest any man should boast.
Yeah.
I can't boast in my righteousness. I think I'm a pretty good guy, but I'm not perfect.
Right.
So I'm not the one who draws the line on how perfect you have to be in God's good graces. God says that.
Right.
And He says that you're a sinner, John. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God.
That's right.
But the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. It's really simple.
Yeah.
If somebody gives you a gift, Christmas time comes, big tree sitting there, and you've got gifts that have your name on them. How stupid would it be for you to grab that gift and never open it up? First of all, what would it say to the person who gave it to you? And then that's just a dumb choice. So I accepted His gift at 9 years old.
Why do you think that salvation is it's a simple concept. We are saved by grace through faith.
Right.
It's a free gift.
Right.
Who doesn't love a free gift?
You didn't have to pay for it.
Most of the time, we say, hey, if something is free, then you should be suspect, right? But this gift that's actually free, it's something that you can actually trust. Why do you think that there are so many people that struggle with grasping the free gift of salvation?
I think somewhere in the core of our being, we want to take credit for our goodness. I think that's what it is. We want to take credit for our goodness.
It sounds like it takes me back to the garden. You can be like God.
Yes, that's exactly right. And all of a sudden they go, really?
Yeah.
Okay, I think I'll try this out.
Wow.
But we can't. Every time people have tried to play God, they do a terrible job at it.
We do. We need to stay in our own lanes as,
Yes.
as human beings, considering our history of
Yeah.
messing it all up. Yeah, I think we
Yeah.
should stay in our lanes.
Yeah.
In your book, you have a quote. You say, peace is more than just a lack of conflicts, ridding our world of war and turmoil. So what is peace?
Well,
to you?
in my book, I did not want to deal with, even though the Ukrainian war was going on when I was finishing my book, and I did deal a little bit with it, asking the question, what kind of songs do you think that Ukrainian believers are singing today? And then I talk about some of the superficial songs that we have in our churches today. But the book is not about war and peace.
Right.
That kind of war and peace. I refer to it, but it's not about that.
Right.
It's about personal peace with God through a traumatic experience. How do I power through that when I wonder, why did God allow this to happen?
Yeah.
You know, there is a difference between God's decretive will, which means he decreed it.
Right.
He said, you are going to suffer, and this is what I'm going to make happen to you. And his permissive will,
Right.
which is powerfully, radically different than decretive will. God does not say, Jon Heymann, I'm going to create people to hurt you, to beat you up. That is not God's decretive will. It is his permissive will. Johnny Erickson taught it. Most people know Johnny Erickson when she dove into a pool at 19 years old and severed her spine, and she's been a quadriplegic ever since. Most people know her as the woman that paints and writes with her mouth because she can't move her arms or legs.
Right.
And she did Hallmark cards for years. I don't think she's still doing them, but she got married eventually. She has an amazing ministry that is worldwide today to disabled people. She's just an amazing woman. But she said this. This is a woman that could have questioned God and did many times. And she said this: God allows what he hates to bring about what he loves. She can say that
Yeah.
because she's lived it. I have too, but not to the extent she has. I haven't had lifelong injuries because I was adopted by a loving family.
Yeah.
But other children were not as lucky as me. And those are part of one of my chapters is lingering doubts. Those are part of my lingering doubts.
Yeah.
I don't have all the answers, but I have decided in my life, and I think most people who believe in God have decided to live with some of the answers, not all of them.
Right.
Because if we knew everything about God, he wouldn't be much of a God.
That's right.
Because the opposite side is those who don't believe in God at all. They don't have any answers. You can ask all the same questions that you've been asking me today about trauma and faith in God and all the rest. Without God, there are no answers. None. There are no answers. So what happens on Facebook? Sorry for your loss. That becomes what we write on Facebook. And people mean it. I mean, they're not being disingenuous. They mean it, but they have nothing more than that. Even many people who say my prayers are with you, they probably deeply mean that. But if they don't believe in God, that really is not an answer because they're not, what are they praying to?
Right.
You know? So I have decided to live with some of the answers rather than none of the answers.
And what are some of those answers for peace? How do you, when you've gone through something so traumatic, whether it be human trafficked as a child and forced to be a slave, or if you have, had your spine severed, how do you make peace with that?
Well, the word is surrender, but let me back it up first, okay? Before we just go there that fast. But that is what it is. It is surrendering. When Jesus was suffering in the Garden of Gethsemane, it says he agonized. In medical term, they call it hematidrosis, where the capillaries right underneath your skin burst and you sweat drops of blood. That's what most people know of the agony and then eventually the crucifixion.
Right.
But when he agonized in the Garden of Gethsemane, we have to ask an ultimate question about him in order to learn what peace with his Father is like. And that is, when he was agonizing, was he at peace? And the answer is yes, but it wasn't the silly kind of peace that we often talk about today. I wish life was just taking a big sigh and a deep breath and going, I'm at peace with this. I wish it was that way.
Wouldn't it be that easy?
And sometimes, Quisha, it is. And it's those moments are pretty cool too. I don't discount them. But it's the agonizing piece that I write about in my book, because people aren't writing about this. They're writing about why do bad things happen to good people.
Right.
But my book is about, but how do you keep peace with God?
Which is the more interesting question, because bad things happen to
it's a deeper
everyone.
question. So what happened in Jesus' life? In the garden, right there. What happened to Paul's life when he was in prison all through the New Testament? Anyhow, what happened with Jesus was simply this. He said, Father, if you could pass this cup from me, please do it.
Right.
I don't want to go through this.
Yeah.
But then he made the colossal, epic statement. He said, but not my will, but yours be done. Wow.
Yeah.
The Savior of the world was at peace with God. So I wish nobody had to go through that experience. I wish nobody had to go through what the Ukrainians are going through today. I wish nobody had to go through what I went through. But people do.
Yeah.
People do. And when they do, there comes a time where we have to surrender. There's the word, surrender. And we have to learn to be, and this is a tough one, but the purpose of my book is to help people think right instead of think wrong. When they think wrong, they cannot handle trouble. They can't handle traumatic experiences because they're thinking wrong. Their expectations are inflated. They think that once they come close to God or accept Jesus as Savior, that everything's supposed to be rosy.
Right.
You know, every time they get a headache, God is their not their tranquilizer, is their Tylenol.
Yeah.
And they take the pill of God, they pray, and it should go away.
Right.
But it doesn't always go away. Sometimes some of these things linger on and on, like Johnny Erickson has experienced, or other people have. Those are the times where surrendering says, God, I don't understand this. I don't understand it.
Right.
But I accept the fact that I don't understand it. So that Paul could say, in times of abundance, I have learned to be content. And in times of want and need, I have learned to be content. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a powerful thought process.
That is a
I mean, the
powerful
psychologists need to learn this when they're counseling people.
Yeah.
That contentment is not the enemy of growth. Contentment is the source of peace.
Contentment is the source of peace.
Yeah.
Being content. And Paul does talk a lot about being content in all things.
Right.
And, you know, I would love for you to talk, if you could tell our young people, because young people today don't seem to understand. A lot of adults quite frankly, don't seem to understand the idea of being able to have peace through trauma. Because, you know, living out here in the West, we're kind of tucked off, and we don't experience many of the things that other people around the world do. And so our poor walk around with cell phones and TVs and cars and a refrigerator full of food. You know, there's no real, many of us don't experience real lack. And so when we go through a little tiny bit of something, you know, it's so traumatic. You know, our kids are having all this anxiety, mental illness. They're not really tough anymore. There's no grit to our kids anymore. They don't know how to struggle. You know, we were talking, you know, Frederick Douglass said, without struggle, there is no progress. Because, you know, the Bible obviously talks about this as well, is very upfront with the idea of persecution. So can you talk a little bit about what the mindset, how do you develop that mindset of being tougher and getting through the trauma?
Well, if you want to avoid all pressure and stress, say nothing, do nothing, be nothing.
Wow.
So we need to teach our children that if you really want to be something, say something and do something with your life, you're going to have pressure, you're going to have stress, and in the words of Jesus, in this world, expect trouble.
Right.
so it doesn't catch you off guard. It's that simple.
Yeah.
Now, my words are simple. Teaching that to the next generation is not, because we want to protect our children from trouble.
Right.
And that's not a bad goal, but we need to teach them to expect trouble, because in fact, it could very well happen. And a young person that has gone through a traumatic experience, perhaps one like mine, or a young lady just shared with a group the other day that she had been abused sexually by family members. That was hard for her to admit in front of this group that I was teaching. Not easy at all. And yet she was very open and transparent about it. Okay, so she's already gone through a traumatic experience. The question now is, does she still trust God? Not that He caused that, but He allowed it. In a sinful world, He allowed that to happen to her. And is there a reason for that? Yes, there is. Because we are like basketballs. When the world pushes us down, we bounce back up. When the world pushes us down harder, we bounce back higher. And if she believes that about herself, mental, psychological, spiritual belief, that she is meant to bounce back up from her traumatic experiences, then God will use her experiences for good, both in her life and, quite frankly, hopefully in the lives of other people. But that's a story for all of us. We're all going to bounce back from our trauma. And if people have not experienced that, expect it. Now, if it never happens, that's cool. That's what I hope for you. I hope it never happens. You have a couple kids. I bet you're hoping that. I bet you're hoping, I don't want a traumatic experience to happen to either one of my kids.
That's right.
But you want them to be ready if it does happen. That's preparation. Right. Prepare so you don't have to repair.
Ooh, that's good. Prepare so you don't have to repair. That's really good. As we are wrapping up here, what do you hope is accomplished by those who read your book?
I want them to know that there's a God that loves them, that He's not playing with their lives. I had one young man say, sometimes I feel like I'm a chess piece on his chessboard, and I'm the one getting knocked down.
Oh, wow.
God is not playing chess with anybody's life. In fact, He's not playing at all. This is very serious for us. It's very serious for Him. The difference between our perspective, and Paul said, we look through a glass darkly. We don't understand everything. I look at it as if it were a parade on the other side of the fence, and I can't see the parade. Okay? So there's a huge parade. There are clowns and animals and jugglers and this huge but I can't see it. So I walk up to the fence, and there's a knothole in the fence, and I look through it, and I see this tiny part of the parade, and somebody says, "What do you see?" I said, "I don't know. I see a lot of gray." And what I'm looking at is an elephant, but I don't know that because I only see a tiny part of this huge parade. God's on top of that fence. He sees from the beginning to the end. He knows every part of it. And I am going to trust that He is in control of a world that is imbalanced because of sin. He didn't create that sin. He didn't create any of the bad choices I've done. But He's going to work through it. He's going to work through me. And so my goal for people reading my book is that they read it and they go, I will let God be the navigator. He's not my chauffeur. He's not sitting in the front seat and I'm telling Him what to do. He's sitting in the back seat. He knows the direction of my life. Sometimes I hit a pothole. That's okay. It's still going to be okay. And that's what I want people to realize, that at times in their lives when they've gone through a traumatic, and one of the chapters I say, one of the words I hate is suffering. Now, earlier in the book, I say another word that is misused is the word awesome. You go to a restaurant and you order a salad.
I remember this part,
Yeah, you order a salad and the waiter or waitress says, what kind of dressing do you want? You say, I'll take ranch dressing. And they go, awesome. And I think to myself, no, when I jumped out of a plane at 11,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean, that was awesome. A perfectly good plane. and I jump out of it with a parachute.
Yeah.
That was an awesome experience.
Right.
And I've had other awesome experiences. I share some of them in the book.
But the ranch,
That's
not so
awesome.
much, right?
Not so much with ranch dressing. Suffering is another one of those words that's used too much. So is the word passion. I have interviewed 1 million people in the child-serving world, and everybody who interviews with me says, I have a passion to work with kids. And I always say to them, that's strike one against you. And they look at me and they go, what? And I said, everybody says that. Everybody that wants to work with children uses the word passion, so it's lost its meaning. You got to give me a better reason. And they do. The good workers who have a heart for this work and a love for children, they do give great reasons. Anyhow, but it's an overused word. Suffering is another one. Oh, I'm suffering with a headache. You know, like, oh, I stubbed my toe today. Okay, suffering, and I'm not joking, although I did not put this one in the book, is a man who's older than me calls me up one night and says, I have a .38 caliber pointed at my head, and I've known this man for years. What am I supposed to do, John? And I say to him, I won't use his name. That's a very selfish act, because you are taking away from me one of my best friends. You're stealing from me one of my best friends. He didn't do it. I'm very glad he didn't do it. But I remember that night. He was suffering. That's suffering.
Yeah.
When people go through something like that, and I do illustrate suffering a lot deeper through a couple other things. I didn't tell that story in this particular book. We need to reflect, how big are our problems really? You know, we have a mouse in the house. That's pretty disgusting. Nobody likes mice in a house.
Right.
But if an elephant ever walked in the house, nobody would care about the mouse anymore.
Yeah.
And that's what happens to people. All of a sudden, a traumatic experience happens. They get diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, which we just heard of a friend last week. That's suffering. And what can we do for people like that? We can be there for them. We can love them and use that word love. I'm going to love you through this, no matter what the outcome is.
Because that's an action word. Love is an action word.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
But be there is only 2 words, real simple to know. Just be there for that person.
Yeah.
Tell them you love them. Tell them that, if it's true, you don't understand what they're going through. Because when you go, I know exactly what you're going through, when you really don't.
That's right.
Don't do that to them, because then they think you're disingenuous. Just love them.
Yeah.
And then the third, and this is the toughest part, expect the worst and pray for the best.
Yeah.
With them. Expect the worst and pray for the best, because every once in a while a miracle happens. And it does. I've been part of those too.
Yeah.
And they're the kind that you sigh and go, I'm at peace with this.
Yeah.
This I like.
Yeah.
But the other one I didn't like as much.
Right.
So I want people to come back to a deep peace of mental, spiritual, and psychological contentment with what's happening in life, even if it's not fantastic right now, because they will bounce back.
That's right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank
you for sharing your story. It's
Appreciate
very, very powerful. Why don't you tell everyone where they can find your book?
Oh, thank you. You can find Agonizing Peace on Amazon, Books A Million, Walmart, Target. You can find it from the publisher, Charis, Kharis, CharisPublishing.com, Kharis. You'll love it. It's in hardback, it's in softback, it's in Kindle, and it just came out in Audible. The person that read for us did a fantastic job for it. So please pick up a copy of Agonizing Peace.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone. I will make sure to put all the links in the description box below. And make sure you go and pick up Agonizing Peace. I am sure it will bless you and bless those around you as well. I love you for watching. I'll see you next time.